All right, well, why don't we get started? We're at a couple minutes after the top of the hour, and I want to start by wishing everyone, most everyone, since we have a global audience, it won't be good afternoon to everyone, so good day to everyone, and welcome. I'm Tom Schreier, and I truly have the privilege of leading the Inspired Leadership Initiative here at Notre Dame. And that's our program for those who've completed their chosen careers and have decided to come back to campus for an academic year to discover, discern, and then design their next act. And now that I hope all believe that there seems to be a light at the end of the pandemic tunnel, I welcome those that are interested to look into us to do so at nb.edu/inspired. We're thrilled to return this semester with a continuation of the Inspiring Conversation speaker series. We're going to spend this semester discussing transforming lives and lives transformed. And this will focus on three critical and timely topics: pursuing a second act, the intersection of spirituality and leadership, and solving societal problems. We have been so pleased by the amount of interest in this program over the fall, and we hope to continue that momentum into this spring. We now have over 1,200 subscribers from 32 countries, and we're grateful. And so many to those who are working involvement. In particular, I want to thank the Alumni Association for all the thought and work they have put into the platform ThinkND, which is, of course, Notre Dame's online learning community. We hope that you'll find your experience as part of our community to be engaging, inspiring, and consistent with the ethos of our program and the university. So just a couple of quick technical items. You're all muted by the host to facilitate a smooth program without background noise. And we greatly encourage you to be engaged, and that will be facilitated by a Q&A session later in the program. In order to do that, please submit your questions for our guests through the Google form you'll see come up on Zoom here shortly, as it's shared with you from Emily. And you can submit your questions via that form to us. Please do submit questions because we want this to be as responsive to you as it possibly can be. And we'd also just recommend that you use speaker view in Zoom, as that'll highlight our speakers as they come on screen. This week, we're truly delighted to welcome Paul Grangaard to discuss the art of creating renaissance. As you may have seen in the preview video on ThinkND, Paul is the chairman and CEO of Faribault Woolen Mill Company and the former CEO of Allen Edmonds, two roles he assumed after leaving senior leadership roles in financial services. Paul's leadership has transformed these iconic businesses, which are also the cornerstones of their home communities. His leadership ensured that those families dependent on the success of these enterprises could continue to be engaged and employed in the craft that they love in a sustainable way. For some, their second act is part-time engagement. For others like Paul, they see a calling to deep immersion for the benefit of customers, employees, and the community. There are many who are fortunate that Paul heard that call. It's my pleasure and a privilege to welcome my friend Paul Grangaard to Inspiring Conversations. So Paul, it truly has been a privilege to know you for many years. And in preparation for this, I actually learned some things that I hadn't really put together before, which are very relevant to our topic today. Before we get into your vocation, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the importance of your avocations to you, like art and history and music, because I think it all ties together really nicely.
Well, first of all, Tom, thank you. I'm so honored to participate in this with you, and it's going to be fun to do it with such a great friend. Avocation and vocation for me, I've brought together. I once had a struggle in a point in my career when I realized that what I was doing was cordoning off who I really was in order to project a more serious image, a business-only image. It was my first big leadership job. It was just before you joined us at Piper Jaffray, and I thought I had gotten a big job and I needed to be somebody new, somebody different, somebody I had conjured up a serious banker ought to be. And I had people saying, "What happened to Grangaard? He's not the same guy we had put into the job." And I realized gradually that you bring your whole self to a job, and the same is also true of the people you hire. They bring their whole selves to the job. It's not that you can hire somebody's productivity and then not get the rest of the person. And no job, as you and I talked about last week, Tom, is perfect for anyone, but the converse is also true. Nobody's perfect for the job they have. So you need to bring everything you have to the job, and then surround yourself with people who make up for whatever it is that makes you not quite right for the job, or vice versa. So my avocations are music. And because in college I had the opportunity, and this was 1979, so the world was a much bigger place back then, to go study in Florence, Italy, and it completely changed my life and set me up for these last two roles that I've played, which at least I think are the most important two roles that I've played, because they really made a pivotal difference. And it was my time in Florence, my exposure to art, history, architecture, design, the little details that occur in the evolution of art history that caused me to be able to be involved in manufacturing businesses that make beautiful consumer products.
So Paul, you touched on this, I think, a little bit in what you just said, but I think it's a really important element. And it comes to identity, right? You said you just didn't feel like up until these two most recent roles that, it really fit with, kind of your broader identity. Talk a little bit more about that. And you also have told a story about how when you first walked into the factory in Port Washington and the kind of sensory experience that you had and what that brought up. I thought that really kind of helped, at least for me, frame this identity question.
Well, it's funny. Like most college kids, I didn't know really what I wanted to do when I got out of college. My father had been a successful commercial banker in Minneapolis, and I had been a happy kid growing up, so it seemed like a good life. And I went into banking, and I was in it for 24 years, actually, different forms, but I got to do different things along the way than your average banker does. First of all, 3 years into my career and just before my wife and I were about to get married, I was transferred to Frankfurt, Germany, where I did very little banking because our company was not competitive at all, really, anymore in international banking at that point. But I studied history, I learned the German language, and I continued the evolution of my interest in history and art while I was there. And I also had some unbelievable experiences touring Germany with my boss, who was, in his early 40s, and took me under his wing and allowed me to speak German with him, as bad as mine was, and drove me up to Wolfsburg to VW headquarters and just taught me about the origin of Volkswagen during the Nazi era. Just so many things that I learned along that way. And this idea of being a banker, well, I was very lucky that my boss and mentor, David Crosby, assigned me to the restaurant industry, where I was working with people who had been completely different than I had growing up. If you go into the restaurant industry, it's possible that the reason you're in it is because you love staying out till 2 a.m. and partying. And so a bunch of these entrepreneurs who were developing these unbelievable restaurant chains taught me so much about design in the restaurant industry. And at that time, it was when the kitchen was being moved out into the restaurant so people could see, as they called it, the theater of preparing the food. And now you see that at all sorts of restaurants. But it was a big thing in the early 90s to do that at a restaurant instead of having the kitchen behind some swinging door. And so there was theater, there was presentation, there was customer service. I learned all that. And then I got a chance to lead my teammates and work with you at the top of the organization at Piper Jaffray. And I realized there, and especially at Piper, Tom, as you'd recall, you're never the smartest guy in the room. There's always somebody who knows more about what you're talking about. I was not the best investment banker in any room at any time, but I was kind of a forward thinker and a little bit creative because of my avocations and interests. And it all fit together really well. And with our friend Paul Karras, who I know is watching, the three of us providing leadership together as great friends and partners, we showed a different culture, a culture of friends are partners and partners are friends, and an intensity, but also with good-natured joking and fun along the way. And the business grew in just 3 years tenfold, which was an unbelievable accomplishment, but it didn't really still fit with me because I just was missing this idea of Florence. I mean, Florence represented to me sort of a place and an idea, a concept, and I didn't find it in the finance business. And when I got a chance to go into shoes, now to get to the end of your question, sorry to take so long to get there, I walked into the plant and into the back where we made the shoes, and it smelled like the St. Mark's Market in Florence, all that leather smell, and it was just brought back so many memories for me, and also the attention to detail and the fine touches that make the difference between a pretty good shoe and a beautiful shoe. And we had the opportunity to develop that there, and it just, I joked with you when we talked before, my other love of music, and I've got way too many song lyrics in my head, using up too much of my disk space. There's not enough room in there anymore, but I thought of the famous John Denver song about him coming to Colorado. The line is, coming home to a place I'd never been before. And that's how I felt when I started the job at Allen Edmonds. I was coming home to a place I'd never been before when we started that job.
So Paul, I think it's safe to say that Port Washington is not Florence, but it's an important community to you, as are the communities that that these businesses are in. Talk a little bit about that, because it's one of the things that's been most powerful as you've been, I think, in this zone of kind of finding where you can, this intersection between your passion and your vocation. That's been really important. So talk a little bit about kind of the importance of the communities and the importance of, you know, these institutions to the communities.
Well, I was raised going to church every Sunday, and we were filled with the idea that a job is your vocation. You know, vocation means calling. It's not just the priests and the ministers who are called, it's everyone is called to do something to serve others. And when I came to Allen Edmonds, we were bankrupt. We were on the verge of probably being sold as a brand, but not as a manufacturing company, if things didn't get better in a big hurry. And I just really felt a calling to go over there and save those jobs. Port Washington was the biggest employer in Allen Edmonds is the biggest employer in Port Washington. Faribault Woolen Mill is the icon of the town of Faribault, which is a really great town about an hour south of the Twin Cities, and has more buildings on the National Register of Historic Places per building than any other community in the state of Minnesota. It's Minnesota's oldest manufacturing company, founded in 1865. And back in the late 2000s, there was a lot of talk about globalization and how manufacturing jobs were leaving America. And even our leaders were saying those jobs are not coming back. And I thought, what a defeatist attitude. Maybe the jobs aren't going to stay the way they are, but if you change your strategy and change your approach, those jobs can come back and you can actually add jobs. And I just felt that was my calling at that time, was to try to help save the company and then grow the company. And I often give presentations to MBA classes about what we did there, talking about growing the e-commerce business, going direct to consumers instead of relying on the wholesale channel, which was shutting us down at the time, and the same thing was happening here at Faribault Woolen Mills. So we opened our own stores, we built our own e-commerce business, and we developed our brand way beyond what we could have done working through others in each case. And we're adding jobs. Here we're up 25% just in a year, and we tripled employment at Port Washington in the 9 years that I was there. And when I put the growth of the employment slide up, it makes me feel much better than when I put up the growth in the revenues and the growth in the profits. I prefer, instead of the quote, "those jobs aren't coming back," the quote I prefer to think about is Winston Churchill's World War II quote, "never, ever give up."
Right. And I think there's another quote from our days at Piper, right, that we talked about, right, that was said by Gene Kranz, which you can recite for us, which I think also has a very consistent kind of ring to it, right?
Yeah, one of the most amazing days of my life was listening to Gene Kranz, the mission controller for Apollo 13, speak to our group and tell the story of bringing Apollo 13 back to Earth safely. And the quote is, of course, "failure is not an option." And that's the way I felt in both of these situations. Failure is not an option. There are too many lives, too many livelihoods. And when you're as identified with the entire town as Faribault Woolen Mill is, it's just not an option. We got to succeed.
So, Paul, you touched on this, but maybe there's a little bit more you'd be comfortable elaborating on this intersection of kind of faith and vocation and occupation. You know, anything, it's not something I don't think many people associate with being, quote, successful in business, right? But you've clearly proven that not to be the case, that you can create that intersection and be supremely successful. So maybe talk a little bit more about that. I think it's an important topic.
Well, you know, you grow up and you don't miss a Sunday school. You learn an awful lot about the number one thing, and the number one thing is to do unto others as you would have done to you. Love your neighbor as yourself. So, as you well know, Tom, because we did it together with Paul, culture is so absolutely key. Happy people do a much better job than people who are disgruntled. So in both these situations, as at Piper, I work very hard to build a culture where people feel they're valued, where their opinion counts. We may go a different direction, but I want to hear that opinion, and where we're all just on the same team. It's not a cascading set of boxes in an organizational chart. I think of organizations as interlocking circles of round tables. My top team is my round table, but each of them has a round table that intersects that they're working with. And sometimes I'll move into their table and I won't sit at the head because there really isn't a head of a table and a round table. Everybody's in the table. So culture is very important. And that comes directly out of my faith and a belief in the value of every human being and of every life. And, you know, if you approach business that way, I think you'll be surprised. We got way off track in America thinking that the shareholder was your most important constituency. And I've learned in these last two jobs, if you treat your customers like they're the most important constituency, and just like with most of us, family and work are kind of tied for number one on different occasions, but of course, family is most important if the chips are down. But on any given day, you got to do a great job at work. Your employees are your other number one constituency. And if you do well by employees, and if you do well by your customers, it's amazing how the shareholders work out just fine in the end. And you don't have to even think about them. They're the only one who derive their benefit from how well you're doing from your other constituencies. And the employees being happy, enjoying their jobs, having a bounce in their step, that makes customers happy. And then it just creates that virtuous circle, the flywheel that Jim Collins talked about in Good to Great.
So Paul, you talk about your fascination when we got together last week with the non-business side of the enterprises that you're engaged in. When you said that, what do you mean by the fascination with the non-business side?
Well, it's all about product. I wouldn't say it's maybe the non-business side, but when you're in a business like this, when I walked into this room, this is our conference room, it was all black and white in here. We did not have a lot of color in our product line. We were not engaging in people's passions among our customer base. We had one very successful flag, the American flag. So we did have that color, but otherwise everything was pretty black and gray. And we've brought out flags for, I don't know, 20 different nations now, and they all sell very well. My interest in art has been important here. We've teamed with 4 artists already. We've got a 5th one coming. It's a diverse group. We have an African-American artist from South Carolina who was born in Kenya. And he's done stuff for us. We've got a Native American artist who just came out with our most successful design ever in terms of the speed with which we've been able to sell. It's a gorgeous product. It's called, her name is Diani Whitehawk. She's of the Lakota Nation, and the design is called Guided. It's just an unbelievable blanket. And then we have, behind me, we have the Constitution. You can see how much detail we can do there. You see We the People. I'm a huge history fan, as you've discussed, and it includes American history, not just the history of the Renaissance. And we're about to come out with the Declaration of Independence with John Hancock's signature on it. I was fascinated by John Hancock's signature when I was a kid. So it's all about product and design and beauty and having a sharp eye. I learned in studying Renaissance art that the fact that the angels wore shoes in one key painting in the development of the Renaissance changed everybody's thinking about God at that point. I mean, that's how impactful putting shoes on the angel was in a certain point in the Renaissance. So that the little things really matter. We just had an experience with our whole design team standing around half an hour ago looking at a new design for the fall. And I said, it's wrong. It's not the design that we have on the screen. And they all said, what? And it's just, I think that training of looking for a little shoe on an angel actually caused me to have an eye for this kind of stuff.
You truly have found your calling. So one other thing that came out very powerfully in our conversation last week, and that I've come to know about you over time, is this idea of the focus on others, not solely on oneself. Talk a little about, do you see that manifest in your life and in your career?
Well, I was very lucky in the investment banking business. That tenfold increase that we talked about early on, put me in a position where I no longer had to worry about sending my kids to college or affording my ridiculous habit with golf courses. So when I went to Allen Edmonds, which is really ridiculous. When I went to Allen Edmonds, I didn't need to be paid that well in order to do that job. And I didn't take bonuses. I gave what little bonus money we had to everybody else. And here now, if I weren't doing this, I'd be volunteering somewhere. So I'm volunteered here. I don't get paid. And it's fine with me because the money that we're saving on me allows us to, we just raised everybody here to over $16 an hour. If they weren't at $16 an hour before, some were at $13 an hour. And that makes a huge difference in their lives. And it's really gratifying to do that, especially since I can afford to. And I had a mentor, David Crosby, who once gave me one of the best sayings of my life: if you can afford to be gracious, you should be. And I think that's, grace is so important in our faith. And if you can afford to be gracious, you should be. So I try to live up to that.
We're going to transition now, Paul. Hard to believe that we're almost halfway through here, but we've got some great questions here from the audience. So I'm going to pose a couple of them. The first comes from Marty Whalen here in South Bend, Indiana. Marty actually was a fellow in our ILI program before, and he's very focused now on career development. So his comment and question are, first of all, very much appreciates your honesty about authenticity. And the two questions are, I'll ask them one at a time. First, looking back, do you have any regrets about your initial career path?
Oh, absolutely not. One of the things that I have found so successful is this round table management style. And I learned that at Piper Jaffray, working with Tom and Paul Karras and others. And I learned it from David Crosby, who was our boss and my mentor. It's just way more powerful when everybody in the room feels empowered to say what they think, to give you their advice, and to share their insights. And I learned, I think, in the investment banking business. You learn that in other professions where everybody has similar training and is yet out doing different things and bringing different experiences to the table. So I don't regret anything at all about that. It was a ton of fun for a long period of time. I loved taking restaurant companies public and working with those entrepreneurs. And then when I was heading the department, our other best team was in healthcare, and we were working with cardiovascular device companies that were changing the way healthcare was done. It was fascinating for me. So no, I would say if there are college kids on watching this, my career is full of serendipities, things that I didn't expect to happen. And I came out of college thinking that I was going to manage my career. And my career has been way more fun, way more enriching because I let serendipities happen to me and I went with them. I wasn't supposed to go run a shoe company. The CEO left and I jumped in as interim and ended up having the guys I was working with saying, hey, you seem to be having fun here. We like working with you. Why don't you stay? And if they hadn't said that, we would have hired somebody else. But I said, you know what? I've never had this much fun. Yeah, okay. If you'll take me, I'll stay. And 9 years later, in 2 sales of the company, it was time for me to move on. But it was, I don't regret anything. Thanks for asking that question. It gave me a chance.
So the second question, that Marty asks, and you literally could not have segued into it more nicely because it's very much about advice to young people. And the question is, what advice would you give to a young person who feels the pressure of going to school to get a degree that's marketable, as compared to perhaps what they're passionate about?
Balance. Balance in life is really important. Balance in your education is really important. So, I obviously, as you can tell, have levered my humanities background more than my finance background. I haven't talked much about my finance background, but I majored in economics. I took accounting in college and I went to business school. And, having more than one kind of tool in your toolbox is really helpful in a long-term career. And some of the best advice I ever heard to college people came from Doug Baker, who has done an unbelievable job running Ecolab in St. Paul. And he said, the key thing when you come out of college and get your first job, you're not going to find your passion. You're not going to get the job of your dreams right out of college because people's dreams don't change that much as they get older. So when you're 23, you're not going to get the job that somebody 43 has been waiting 20 years to do. So the key, though, is to move ahead. The key is to not have 6 entry-level jobs in a row, is what Doug said. I thought that was perfect. Get your entry-level jobs out of the way. Work as hard as you can in that job, even if it isn't perfect for you. As I said at the beginning, no job is perfect for you, and you're not perfect for any job. It's a question of molding each other to the right experience. So get out of the entry level thing as soon as you can. Then things start to open up.
So the second question comes from another one of our esteemed ILI alums, Eileen, here in South Bend as well, whose comment is a wonderful message. And what she'd want to know is, if you have any comments on the political environment today, and how that has, kind of impacted your thinking in your career.
Well, that's a really great question. And Tom, I want to thank you for having all your fellows plant questions. I mean, that was really kind of you to do that so we could keep talking. I think we have to look at ourselves in the mirror. We're electing the people who represent who we are today. You look at how the vast majority of Americans behave anonymously in the web channels and the internet. This idea of people, the point I made earlier about you hire the whole person. I remember, I think this is a very insightful thing. Jack Welch was everybody's star CEO back in the late 80s. And he had a thing that he would do at GE, which was fire 10% of the people every year. Imagine what that does to teamwork when you're sitting in a room and one of you is going to get fired if there are 10 of you in the room, and if there are 22 of you are going to get fired. Imagine what that does to risk-taking in innovation. Thomas Edison, the founder of General Electric, once famously said, "Yes, I invented the light bulb, but I invented 100 things that didn't light anything before I got to the light bulb." Failure is part of innovation and creativity. And if you're in a room where you're worried that you're going to get fired for a small failure, you're not going to dream, you're not going to be creative. So, and that kind of an environment, there were other CEOs at that time, Chainsaw Al, Jack the Ripper, a guy named Larry Bossidy wrote a book called Execution, which when I read it, I thought it was more about what he intended to do to people than it was about how business was supposed to perform efficiently. So, and we're just too sharp-edged now. And so what do we get? We get leadership that's extremely sharp-edged, quick to point out faults, quick to focus on hating both the sinner and the sin, which is not how most of us have been raised. It certainly wasn't how I was raised. A little bit of hate the sin, but not even that much, because there but by the grace of God go I. We are all human, we all make mistakes, and we certainly shouldn't be hating sinners, because we all are.
Well, Paul, I think, what you just said does get, as I said in my intro, what I love about a conversation like this is it does get to the ethos of, I think it also, for many, gets to an unexpected perspective from someone who's been all of those things that I think some people think of as evil, right? Like investment banker and so on and so forth, right? And that's the beauty of this, right? Is to really, hopefully highlight the fact that there's a humanity informed by humanities in many cases behind all of this. The next question does not come from a fellow, but it comes from Maureen in East Hampton. And her question is, and then I'm going to add a little something on because you alluded to it. Her question is a really important one. It's, what's your favorite golf course? But then also talk a little bit about the role of golf in your ability to assess your own kind of personal state of mind, because I know that golf is one of those indicators in your life.
Oh my, how much more time do we have?
Yeah.
My favorite golf course is Pebble Beach. I was just turning into a golf fan when Jack Nicklaus won the US Open there in 1972. It was gorgeous. My fascination with California sort of began there. My wife and I, as college sweethearts, started dating, and we hopped in a car one day and drove down to Pebble Beach. And this was before Pebble Beach was a fortress. And I took my shoes off and ran out onto the 18th green. And she took a picture of me in a golf shirt, made in Minnesota, by the way, Muncie wear golf shirt, standing on the 18th green with next to the flag with the Pacific Ocean on a beautiful day behind me. And it's probably certainly one of my top favorite pictures of all time, but I don't know where it is anymore. I can only see it in my mind's eye. So I love Pebble Beach, everything about the beauty of 17 Mile Drive and the Monterey Peninsula and the Pacific Ocean out there with the crashing waves on the rocks. And it's just a great golf course. In terms of golf and my psyche, as Tom so well knows, and maybe some other, I was a pretty good golfer for quite a long time. And I went through this midlife crisis when I realized that I didn't want to be in finance anymore. I wanted to do something else, but I was so tied up with my friends at the company and how much I enjoyed them. And I was also tied up with the fact that I was a senior executive at this company. And, you know, to walk away from all that was tough, and I didn't know where I'd go. So I had a bit of a midlife crisis. I like to joke that I bought a Volvo convertible because it was a safe midlife crisis car. So it fit with my personality. But the other thing was I put all sorts of pressure on my golf game to make me happy because I really wasn't that happy at work anymore. And I am really glad that I didn't blow anything else up except my golf game. That was too much pressure for my level of golf ability, and I got terrible at the game, and I'm still trying to recover from that. But one of the things it taught me is, and we all know people who probably don't get this, there are more important things in life than golf. I was so glad I didn't blow up my marriage. I didn't blow up my family. My kids and I are still great friends, and my wife and I still have a terrific marriage. But golf doesn't love me as much as it used to, and I'm sort of mad at it for that.
Okay, the next question, Paul, pivoting back, is from Bill in Carmel, and yes, he is another fellow, but you know that he's another alum.
Yeah, but he's in Carmel, so that's cool.
Yeah, Carmel, Indiana.
Oh,
so the true car, you know, it's sort of like Port Washington versus Florence, I think. But sorry, Bill, I shouldn't have said that. But his question is, in your experience, in a world that values expertise, how do you find ways to pivot into doing things about which you are passionate, but not necessarily an expert?
That allows me to say one of my favorite quotes to myself, which I like to quote all sorts of famous people, but every now and then I quote myself. And one I quote all the time is, it really pays to work with pros. I got to Allen Edmonds and I knew we needed to build direct to consumer. We needed to build our brand to make it much stronger. And I didn't know how to do either one of those things. So my first hire, and I also didn't know much about fashion. So my first hire was a guy who had spent an entire career. He was in his late 50s at the time in men's fashion. My second hire was a former partner at Leo Burnett in the advertising agency who brought a tremendous amount of brand building knowledge and skill. And my third hire was a guy who had been chief merchant for Dayton Hudson Department Store, chief operating officer for Gander Mountain Stores, and had opened stores all around the country. And the three of them taught me so much in a big hurry. And because I love education, I was a pretty good student. I listened, and they made up for the things that I lacked. What I brought to them was the partnership leadership style, a culture focus, and also a vision for what I thought Allen Edmonds could be, and then this sharp eye on leather. And the combination was really powerful. Without them, I would have flopped big time, really, and quickly.
So is there an analog to what you brought to Faribault that's consistent with, or is it perhaps different from what you brought to Allen Edmonds?
Well, the great thing is, college is only 4 years long. Allen Edmonds was a 9-year tutorial for me. And the playbook we had at Allen Edmonds by the 9th year is the playbook that we've instituted here. And actually, I now know the place pretty well, but I also brought the same head of retail, just joined us in December to help us roll out retail. Another couple, that same design fashion guy is working with us again here. So, and his colleague who came in about halfway through the Allen Edmonds experience is also here designing. So we've got design people, retailing people, e-commerce people. There are about 6 Allen Edmonds alums who are helping bring this playbook to life here at Faribault Woolen Mill. Pays to work with pros.
The next question, Paul, gets to what do you mean by the whole person? I remember you relayed to me that was your first famous quote because it showed up on the outside of a building as you were presenting inside. But talk a little bit about what you mean by the whole person.
Well, you hire the whole person, not just their productivity. And I think I once lost a deal early on in my investment banking career to a family that was local to Minneapolis, and they chose the expert from out of town. And my boss joked that I practically cried around the office when we lost that business. And I thought that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but I was definitely depressed and bummed out about it. And a senior person at the office said, Paul, don't take it like that. Don't take it like that. It's not personal. It's just business. And I thought, this is a community here. That fee is now going out of the community. It's not going in the United Way in the Twin Cities at all. It's personal to me. I said, I'm spending all this time here. My wife is not here with me now. Our little baby's not here with me. It better be personal or I'm wasting a lot of time. And so I've always felt that business actually is personal. And your relationships with your suppliers, your customers. I respond to customers who email me, and often they'll say, I can't believe you actually responded. And not only did I respond, but I actually gave them a full answer. If it takes 3 paragraphs, they get 3 paragraphs. Business is personal, I believe, and particularly with your employees, you have to care about the whole person. If they think you care about them, they'll listen to you better. If they think you care about them and you ask them to do something they maybe don't want to do, they're more likely to do it. And it's not the reason to care about them. The reason to care about them is because of our faith. But it does have some ancillary benefits, which is people work harder for people they like.
So next question, Paul, gets to talk about this top line focus versus bottom line focus. How do you orchestrate that focus and drive success?
Yeah. Well, the great thing in the again, something I learned in the finance business is it's all about fees. There aren't really many costs. You have computers and telephone lines and every now and then presentation books to print out, but it's really about ideas and conversations and advice and then being paid for that, fees. So it's all about the top line in that business. And when I got to Allen Edmonds, we were in a sales decline. Our sales were down 30% from the level at which we had bought the company just a year and a half before. And the focus for me immediately was not on how do we survive at 30% lower sales. The focus was how do we get back to that same sales level? Let's worry more about building the revenue than about cutting expenses. Nobody gets excited about a vision to be a low-cost producer. I used to, in the investment banking business, hear all sorts of CEOs stand up front, talk about how they were going to be the low-cost producer. And that idea in the late 80s and early 90s led to all sorts of offshoring of important jobs, communities destroyed, particularly in in the Southeast and in the Northeast outside of New York, where a lot of our consumer products had been manufactured. That all went overseas to Asia, and people were just left behind with nothing to do, no jobs, no livelihoods, all in the name of efficiency. But what happened was everybody did the same thing. I call it the cult of best practices. How can you be better than anybody if you're just trying to do the same thing that they do? And so we don't focus on efficiency. I had to make some cost cuts at both of these companies when I got there, and we did them quickly, and then we didn't talk about them ever again. What we talked about was, how do we just get better? How do we make our products better? I read an article about Faribault as a great day trip in the Star Tribune, the Minneapolis paper, right before I started here, and the writer wrote this, quote, "You know Faribault, the town with the scratchy blankets." And I thought, well, we got to change that. And I got down here and nobody was working on making our blankets soft and supple. Well, now we work on that. And lo and behold, all we had to do was change how we wash them. And the innovation came from one of those designers I brought over from Allen Edmonds. He said, well, we'll just use a different softener in the wash cycle. And now we're using different yarns to achieve even better results. But the initial result of just changing the wash cycle was amazing. So I don't even remember the question, but you got to watch you can't make a product that, oh, it's about focus on the top line. Well, the other thing was product development. Both of these companies felt that there was a limit to how many products you could do and be efficient. And I just threw that right out the window. I said, we're going to make more products. If you make more products, you're more likely to appeal to more people. We tripled the product line within 18 months at Allen Edmonds, and we did 100 new products last year. And lo and behold, both companies turned around a lot faster than I even expected them to when we did that. And then there's the quote that you're looking for, Tom, that I will say. Sales growth makes up for a lot of sins farther down the income statement.
I actually wasn't looking for that quote. There was no quote I was looking for. I was looking for what you actually provided as an answer. That was even better. So the next question gets to leadership, Paul.
Yeah.
How did you learn how to lead? You know, there's actually now an author that's gained something, you can't learn leadership in college, or colleges are terrible at teaching leadership. And maybe that's part of the message here. We didn't actually talk about this, but I think, you've clearly evolved into somebody who's become a very strong leader in an area you're passionate. But how did you learn how to lead?
Well, the great thing about mentors is nobody's perfect. And so you should have more than one. And take the best things from your best mentors, and the things that maybe aren't so great, learn from their mistakes as well. It's great to learn from mistakes, especially when there's somebody else's. So, I've always been highly attentive to what other people are doing, and I learned a lot. And then you and I, Tom, had the blessing of working for the most incredible natural leader we ever knew, Paul Karras. And the man is over 90% blind, which means that when he's talking to you, he's trying to see the outline of your face in what light he can get through his eyes. So he's intensely focused on the person in front of him. Nothing distracts him. And he's also intensely giving as a person. A friend of mine once said about Paul, he's the only person who can give you a tough message in a performance review, and you walk out of there feeling better about yourself. And he's of Greek descent, and the word charisma is a Greek word, like all words if you love the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. But charisma is definitely a Greek word. And I read an article about the same time that we were starting to work with Paul with his incredible abilities. And the ability was, the article said, charisma is not how you make people feel about you, it's how you make people feel about themselves. And that kind of changed my life. Because for a while there, I was trying to make people think I was ready for the job, I was the right guy, but I'm, this kind of positive person and other attributes that I wanted them to think about me. And working with Paul and that article and just the way we worked together and how things developed, I started to think, why am I trying to show off here? Why am I trying to be something that I want people to think highly of? What I should be doing is making people feel great about themselves. And that actually kind of worked. The other thing I would say is if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Back to the golf analogy, they say, and this was my problem for 15 years, if you can't visualize a good shot, you're not going to hit one. Vision is so important. And again, having seen a lot of different companies, a lot of companies' visions are statements about doing better this quarter than the same quarter a year ago. And financial performance visions, return on equity visions, none of those visions inspire people very much. We wanted to be America's great shoe company. That's a vision, all right? How do you get there? At Piper Jaffray, the three of us decided we wanted to be a great growth company investment bank. Okay, what do you need in order to be a great growth company investment bank? I like to joke in a business class, a lot of vision statements that you read from companies are actually philosophies about ethics and morals, which is terrific. We need more of that in our country, but what do you want to be? What do you want to be? What do you want to become? What's the road leading to? I like to joke with all the frustration we've had in Minnesota with the Minnesota Vikings that, that's like the Vikings vision being they want to have the fewest penalties in a season. No, you want to win the Super Bowl. So what do you need to get on the team, have on the team? How do you need to play in order to win the Super Bowl? Vision is also a key thing in leadership. Charisma, focused outward, not inward, and vision. Those two things, I'd say.
So, Paul, the last question we're going to have time for, and then there's a statement here, and then I'll have to wrap up. But the last question comes from Joseph in New Jersey, and it is, how do you know what kind of a company and business is wrong for you? And I'm going to add a little something there. How do you actually make a transition then from that into something else? Because I think for a lot of people, especially young people today, it's very difficult. They feel trapped in what they're doing, and they have a hard time making that transition that you've done successfully, and as you said, sometimes serendipitously during the course of your career.
Well, I always give people coming out of college the advice to think more about the people they'll be working with than about what they're going to be doing in their first job. So one way you know a company is not right for you is if you're working for people you're just not comfortable being around, either because of their values, their ethics, or the way they treat other people, the way they approach their daily lives. I mean, that's one thing. That was never a problem for me at any spot along my career, but I've been around companies that seems to be an issue. So that's one thing. Another thing is just, are you using your talents? Do you have talents that are just completely on the sideline? And that's okay if you don't really care that much about them. But if they're really important to you, then it's time gradually to make a change. The other thing I would say is a lot of young people today, in my observation, seem to be making rather knee-jerk, quick decisions. I'm not growing anymore in my job. Well, you've only been in it for a year and a half. How about now that you know what you're doing the job for a couple of years and helping your company, and then getting a good performance review and maybe moving up within that company to a job you find more fulfilling, or else finding another role. But it isn't if you feel like you stopped out. That's not when you should immediately turn and start looking for something new. Try to always make the best of the situation you're in, make your boss look better, make the company perform better, and good things will happen to you. And then I think it's look for those open doors. Is there a door opening that might use your whole being in a way that you'd prefer?
Well, thank you, Paul. Well, as a self-professed listener, the last thing I'll pass along from our audience comes from somebody you know, and it's Lauren. And so, in the grand scheme of expanding products, she thinks that you should make more baby products because she thinks your blankets are absolutely amazing. So we'll close with that, and I'll close. Paul,
Wait, I got to jump in on that and say that's in process, Lauren. It's a great idea. Thank you. We're going to come out with a whole new line of baby blankets in about 3 months, and they're going to be so soft you won't believe it.
No doubt about that. Is that because of the softener or the wool? Is the question I can now ask as an informed consumer.
Both.
But Paul, let me just close with sincere gratitude. This has been fun. Hopefully it's been informative and inspiring to the group. I think your story is a great one, and it's one I think that a lot of people don't have an opportunity to hear. And it's just so fun to see you just right in your zone. You've got a flow, and you're doing just absolutely spectacular things. Something which, having nearly been killed on the golf course with you during the dark period as your ball would wend its way in directions that I didn't think could ever be the flight of a ball. I'm glad to see that's also come back in. And so that may be another one of those indicators for some people that they're not necessarily in the right job. But I want to just thank you again, Paul, for joining us. Thank you for all that you've done. And I also want to thank our entire audience for joining us. I hope you found it to be as enjoyable and thoughtful and inspiring as I did. Just as a reminder, next week, we have Dr. Juliana Atieno. She's the former head of Kenya's largest research hospital, and she's recently founded the Rusalia Research Foundation. And she's also a senior lecturer at Utima University Medical School. And she is, Paul's, sorry to have to say this again, an alum of the Inspired Leadership Initiative. And we'll be sharing a primer on ThinkND prior to next week's session. Please do review that. And come prepared to engage, and feel free to share the series with your friends. We'll be accepting registrations throughout the entire program. Paul, once again, thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Tom, thank you so much. It was such an honor. Thank you for having me. I really appreciated this opportunity. And thanks to the audience.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Paul.